You stand beside the raised bed with the watering can, watching the water pour out. It hits the surface, pools up, and turns the dirt dark and wet. It looks exactly the way a freshly watered garden is supposed to look. You assume the job is done. But if you were to put the watering can down and push your finger 2 inches into that exact same spot 10 minutes later, you would hit dry, dusty earth. The surface looks perfectly wet, but the root zone is still entirely thirsty. 2 raised beds can sit side by side, receive the exact same seeds, and get the exact same amount of water from the exact same hose. One bed stays workable and cool through the late afternoon heat. The other bed dries out by 3 o'clock, leaving the plants drooping and stressed. The difference has nothing to do with the temperature of the air. The difference was buried inside the structure of the soil long before the water ever touched it. When the garden wilts, the human instinct is to rescue it. You grab the hose. You water it again. You do it the next day, and the day after that. If you are doing this, you are not alone. In many backyard gardens, the gardener is doing more and more work, but the soil is holding less and less water. The strange part is that the water you apply is not actually vanishing into thin air. It is just refusing to go where it belongs. This happens because of a hidden condition that develops over time, especially in raised beds and containers. When soil degrades, it often develops a hydrophobic crust. Hydrophobic simply means it repels water. It usually starts when the soil is left bare, exposed to the sun, and depleted of organic matter. The physical particles of the dirt dry out so completely that they essentially lock together. When water hits this baked, dusty surface, it does not sink in. The surface tension of the water itself is stronger than the pulling force of the dry dirt. So the water simply sits on top, waiting to evaporate, or it finds the path of least resistance. It runs horizontally along the surface, finds the gap between the soil and the wooden wall of the raised bed, and escapes down the sides. It drains out the bottom without ever touching the center of the root zone. You look at the wet surface and the wet ground beneath the bed, and you think you have watered the plant, but you have only washed the edges. This is where most gardeners get mislawed. The assumption is that dry soil just needs more water. But dry, degraded soil does not act like a sponge. It acts like a table. You cannot force a table to absorb a spill just by pouring more water on it. The mistake many people make at this point is changing their schedule instead of changing their soil. They start watering every day, sometimes twice a day. They switch to light, shallow sprinklings just to keep the surface looking damp. This creates a secondary, much worse problem. When you water shallowly and frequently, you are training the plant to survive in the danger zone. Roots are blind, but they follow moisture. If the only available moisture is in the top 2 inches of the bed, the roots will stay in the top 2 inches. They will weave themselves through the shallowest, hottest, most vulnerable part of the soil. When the midday sun hits, that top layer bakes, and the shallow roots bake with it. The plant looks hungry and exhausted, but the real problem is storage. The plant has been forced to live out of a thimble instead of a reservoir. The fix is not to add more water. The fix is to change what the soil can hold. The goal is to rebuild the biological sponge. Organic matter like compost, broken down leaves, or aged manure holds incredible amounts of moisture. It does not just trap water. It changes the physical structure of the bed. It opens up channels. It breaks the surface tension. It gives the water a reason to pull downward instead of running sideways. If your bed is already planted, and you are fighting this dry-out cycle right now, you cannot dig up the whole system, but you can correct it from the top down. First, you have to run a simple field test. Go to the center of your bed, away from the edges. Dig down just 2 or 3 inches with your hand or a trowel. If it is bone dry just beneath a dark, crusty surface, you have found the hard stop. The protocol starts with breaking that tension. You do not want to till or destroy the roots, but you need to gently scratch the surface of the soil. Take a hand cultivator or a simple fork and lightly rough up that top crust. You are just opening the pores of the soil so it stops acting like a hard floor. Next, you need to introduce the sponge. Lay down an inch or two of good, rich compost directly over the scratched surface. Do not mix it deep into the bed. Just let it sit on top. This compost layer will act as a buffer. When you water the bed, the water will hit the compost first. Because the compost is biologically active and structurally porous, it absorbs the water immediately. It stops the runoff. It holds the moisture and allows it to slowly percolate down into the old, dry soil below. But a sponge sitting in the open sun will eventually dry out too. That is why the protocol requires one more step. You must cap it. Once the compost is down, cover it with a layer of natural mulch. Wood chips, shredded leaves, or clean straw will work perfectly. This layer does not feed the plant directly, but it fundamentally changes how the bed behaves. It breaks the impact of the water pouring from your hose, preventing the soil from compacting again. More importantly, it shades the soil beneath it. It stops the sun from turning your new compost layer back into a dry crust. Once the structure is repaired, you have to change how you deliver the water. You have to stop watering for the surface and start watering for the depth. Instead of standing there with the hose for 60 seconds every day, you want to soak the bed slowly, deeply, and less frequently. If the soil is severely dried out, you might need to water it in phases. Water the bed lightly. Walk away for 15 minutes to let the compost absorb and swell, and then come back to water it deeply. The moisture will follow the channels you have opened, pulling down into the bottom of the bed. Over time, this changes everything happening below the surface. The roots realize the moisture is no longer trapped at the dangerous top layer. They begin to dive. They follow the water down into the cooler, safer zones of the raised bed. The payoff is entirely practical. You will notice that the swing between too dry and too wet starts to disappear. The plants stop drooping at 2 in the afternoon. You spend less time standing in the heat holding a hose, hoping the garden survives the day. The old method was not a failure because of the weather. It was a failure because the soil was empty of structure. When you look at a raised bed, it is easy to see it as a box full of dirt that just needs to be kept wet. But once you understand the mechanics hiding underneath, that view changes. The watering can is not a life support machine keeping a dying plant alive day by day. It is just a simple tool used to recharge a working system. If the bottom of the bed is built right, the whole season stays strong. The soil holds the answer, and now, your soil can actually hold the water.